In this video, I'm going to be philosophizing on personality characteristics concerning duty of care. Duty of care concerns the personality characteristics associated with certain self-preferences to engage more self-care conducts and or more meaningfully satisfy consistently and or more reliably engaging more systematic thinking, organizing complex sets of meaningful information into more appropriate and or bite-sized, step-by-step approaches to more complex situations to satisfy certain underlying psychological needs, mostly related to accomplishment and or often avoiding harm in relation to regulation of stress, engaging self-care prevention mostly, and or proactivity to mitigate the risks associated with future-oriented harms and or threats and or injury onto the person, meaning that one engages more in self-care preliminarily to prevent and or mitigate risks associated with the harmfulness with engaging certain more difficult conducts in relation to often self-directed learning, engaging a domain-specific self-disciplining process to appropriately manage and or elaborate creative strategies into practical wisdom one may cultivate within the domain-specific consistent conducts one engages more a practice in, not necessarily always engaging the creative solutions and or resolutions per se, yet more the tried and true wisdom subsequent to the engaging of certain creative solutions and or problem solvings, to engage more meaningful conducts from certain existing priors, connecting the meaningful similarities to infer certain domain-specific problems in relation to the meaningful similarities one elaborates and or may develop more elaborative granularity as one engages more the accomplishment and or intrinsic motivation within the appropriate duty of care, pursuing more difficult self-tasks within the step-by-step approaching of strictly meaningful similarities within the problems one experiences in domain-specific repeated experiential encounters with certain self-care conducts, allowing for more optimal domain-specific healthy psychological functioning and or engaging domain-specific self-regulations, more specific to emotional regulation, to prevent and or mitigate psychological distress and or certain stressors in relation to the stress response, more appropriate to optimize one's healthy psychological functioning within that domain. Yet it does not necessarily mean that one is engaging more emotional intelligence per se and or is more emotionally intelligent, as often it is the connections with other personality characteristics, including the most meaningful openness to exploration and or emotional intelligence, to appropriately creatively resolve more difficult problems within more distinct and or internal and or external conditions and or situations, more demanding in terms of the appropriate responses, exploring the unknown unknowns to provide a creative solution to remedy the distinct problems appropriate to one's future-oriented conducts, compared to emotional intelligence, more related to how one regulates one's emotion across distinct internal and or external conditions and situations, not necessarily within the domain-specific pursuit one is more familiar with, and therefore has easier access to certain problems and or easier access to existing priors to engage those problems more meaningfully and with easier access to knowledge and or evaluation of solutions one can provide without necessarily engaging what is uncertain and or unfamiliar and or therefore might be more likely to elicit negative emotions, including anxiety experienced with uncertainty and or depression and or panic, as one engages more appropriate duty of care domain specific to the self-care conducts one has easier access to knowledge and or evaluation to be able to optimize. That's all I want to say for this video. Hope you have an awesome one. Give those aptitudes.